Okay, we are live with another Street Entrepreneurs digital workshop. Today we have the pleasure of having with us Michelle Thimesch, who is going to talk about if investment crowdfunding is right for you, how to get started. So without further ado, Michelle, feel free to take it over.
Hi, everyone. Michelle Thimesch. I'm a business lawyer and the co-founder of Crowdfund Mainstreet, which takes advantage of a new law and a new way of creating opportunities to get financing for small businesses and startups. I'll go ahead and share my screen so you can see a presentation, and we'll just kind of go through some background. Because it's relatively new, what we're doing with investment crowdfunding, I think it's important to take the time to set up kind of what we're doing and what we're talking about. The new rule that we're using is essentially about 4 years old. And it's really obvious to me and to others in the industry that investment crowdfunding can really be a tool for economic justice. Something we know we desperately need right now is that new tool. And we know that our economy right now needs more than ever support for small business. I think someone told me recently, I thought it was this great analogy. They said, you know, when rabbits face a crisis, they freeze, right? When humans face a crisis, they entrepreneur. And it's sort of been our history in our country that we use entrepreneurship as a means to recover from every economic crisis we've ever had. It's our path to self-determination. And we know that our communities really support our homegrown businesses, not just because we like the character and the feel of our communities, the uniqueness that we celebrate when we have homegrown businesses in our communities, places that are unique to where we are. And if you know, look across the country and we see how many of our cities and towns are becoming more like kind of anywhere USA, because we have a large number of multinational chains that are in overtaking our communities. So, you know, even though you might be in St. George, Utah, you wouldn't necessarily know it but for the landscape, because there's just the Walmart and the Home Depot and the yogurt lands, all of those businesses. And the problem with those businesses is that you need many more of them, because so much of the money that is spent at those multinational companies doesn't stay locally in the community. There's a $25 difference per 100 actually. And the studies and the research have shown us that much of a difference per $100 is the difference between living wage jobs. It's the difference in civic engagement in our communities. It impacts philanthropy. It touches us in every way imaginable. Not to mention the fact that we lose some of the charm and character that is really vital to our communities. We know that our businesses, one of the things that is the problem, Americans do not have trouble with lack of ideas. There are so many ideas, so many really good ideas that can solve some of our underlying systemic problems that we're experiencing in our society. And we look to small business to solve some of those problems. And small business is in fact over half of the employment in our country. But despite the fact that it's that valuable to our economy, we don't have the finance ecosystem to support it. That's why 82% of businesses fail because of cash flow problems. And this is really important to note, that these are not businesses that would fail if they had the capital that they need. So sometimes you'll hear people talk about small business being a particularly risky investment, But the truth is that a properly capitalized company is not an especially risky investment endeavor. And so we are talking about providing a means for us to robustly and sustainably get financing to the kinds of companies that we want to support, that are fixing the problems that we see. And this, of course, has everything to do with economic self-determination. I am an advocate by nature, believe that this is a tool that should be used for that economic self-determination, that entrepreneurship. The one thing that we have sort of relied on in our history is support of small businesses, as well as opportunities for upward mobility. And the research shows that the more we facilitate access to opportunities, the more innovation that we see. In order to accomplish this, though, we can't rely on the systems that got us here in the first place. We really need to start looking at some of the newer tools that can help us get to where we need to be. That's where investment crowdfunding comes in. Investment crowdfunding is a new tool that is available for communities, Main Street sectors, specific portions of a community or a specific industry, leaders and others in the community. This is a way to build wealth. One of the big things that we distinguish is actually making an investment, because investment crowdfunding allows anyone to participate. What we're really doing is we're saying not only can communities decide what kinds of businesses they want to finance and support, but we can also start seeing the opportunity for individuals who don't have a lot of money to start accessing opportunities to build wealth the way the wealthy have done for generations. So this is really an exciting opportunity for us on both the health and the well-being of our communities in terms of self-sustaining a monetary system, as well as our entrepreneurship and celebrating innovation that small businesses bring to the table. So I just want to make sure everyone kind of knows what crowdfunding is. The stats are that most people do, but it is a collection, it's a collective effort, a large number of people investing relatively small amounts of money. I try to tell people that this is a lot like the 21st century version of barn raising. I grew up in Chicago, but my uncle had a farm in rural Michigan. And I remember in the summers, every summer we would go spend time at my uncle's farm. And every weekend there was somebody's farm that you were going to work on, whether it was painting or building a new structure. The way the community worked, it was this kind of concept, this crowdfunding, multiple people coming together for the greater good. Every culture in society since the beginning of time has had some version of this. So in terms of who we are as human beings, this is not a new concept. In terms of how we do it from a regulatory standpoint, this is relatively new information. So Crowdfund Mainstreet, my platform, really focuses on using the platform as an economic tool, a way to be a silent partner in communities that really want to have a means of sustainably bringing capital to their small businesses and startups. But it is important to note that not all crowdfunding is created equal. And I want to talk just briefly about the different kinds of crowdfunding, because rewards-based crowdfunding and donation-based crowdfunding have actually been around longer than investment crowdfunding. And oftentimes that's what people think that we're talking about. So a rewards-based crowdfunding campaign is one where people contribute to a business or a venture that they think is really exciting, and they might get some sort of simple reward for it. They might get a coffee mug, they might get the opportunity to buy a product when it's released. They might get a cool t-shirt. Those are rewards-based crowdfunding, and they have a place. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is important to distinguish it. We'll talk a little bit later on. Donations-based crowdfunding is crowdfunding where you're really contributing to a cause, a GoFundMe campaign. Usually these are campaigns that kind of pull at our heartstrings and encourage us to be philanthropic, which again is a vital part of our society and what we do. But there is no expectation of a financial reward or a return for making that donation. So it is not an investment. Investment crowdfunding, on the other hand, is a way for us to open up to anyone an offering that can be either debt or equity. And in fact, you will hear a lot of people call investment crowdfunding equity crowdfunding. I don't like to call it equity crowdfunding because equity is just one way to use investment crowdfunding. You can also raise debt. And therein lies the art, actually structuring that offering. Whether or not it's a good fit for your company to raise debt or equity is a question that we have to wrestle with on a case-by-case basis. And we'll have lots of time for questions on any of that. But I want to point out the good news about investment crowdfunding is that, well, we know crowdfunding can be hard and challenging, particularly rewards and donation based. You can see that of all types of, those types of crowdfunding, the average raise is about $7,000. And over half of the campaigns fail altogether. And if you think about it, it makes sense. There isn't really anything that the person contributing the money is getting in return for that contribution in rewards or donation-based crowdfunding. So it's going to be a pretty narrow market that you're looking to support you. And of course, there's a lot of options that people have in that regard. Contrast that with investment crowdfunding, which has an average raise of over $250,000. That's quite a jump from the average of $7,000 that you see on rewards versus donation-based crowdfunding. It works similarly. Crowdfunding is crowdfunding, but it matters a lot which type that you're using. And I just want to point out here that one of the things that makes me so excited, and the reason I started Crowdfund Mainstreet, is because I really wanted entrepreneurs who don't historically have access to capital to be able to participate, to be able to find the right investors, do the offering so that they can actually get their visions and their dreams funded. The interesting thing is that investment crowdfunding has actually proven to be a great tool for underrepresented entrepreneurs. Women and people of color who historically stack up very poorly in the traditional finance ecosystem are about 70% likely to reach their minimum investment when they use investment crowdfunding. And that statistic is actually over a year old. And we've seen improvement over that. We don't have the exact number, but we know that this is the tool that actually works for the demographic that we're trying to serve. If you are a person of color or a woman looking to get funding, it doesn't make any sense that you would go after some of the types of capital that you have less than 1% chance of receiving. It makes much more sense to focus on a type of a tool that you could use that you have over a 70% chance of succeeding. I want to thank you and also share with you how to, and we'll stay here so that you have this and we can go into Q&A. But people often ask me, what is the best way to get kind of an interview? I personally interview everyone who, before they can launch or apply to launch on investment crowdfunding. And we have a raise funds tab on our site. It's the best way to actually get scheduled for an interview, is to go ahead and fill out the simple application. You don't have to give too much information in that initial step. And then, of course, if you have general questions, we can answer those through our admin at admin.crowdfundmainstreet.com. So I hope I've given you sort of a broad sweep of investment crowdfunding, and I know that there's lots of questions about how to do it and how to do it well. So I want to open it up to questions and make sure that we have time for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. And I'll be reading questions from our Facebook Live. But before we do that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your story and why you came to this.
Yeah. I actually grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. My parents were both entrepreneurs. My mother ran travel agencies, and my father was actually in construction, real estate, investing. And I grew up very middle class. No one in our neighborhood had a lot of money, but everyone had a good quality of life. We didn't take fancy vacations, but everyone in our neighborhood had a vacation every year. The quality of life was very idyllic because it never occurred to us that we didn't have the opportunity to go be, like, it never occurred to me that I couldn't be a lawyer. I decided at 7 or something very early on that I was going to be an attorney. And it never occurred to me that that might not be possible for me, because I think we were living in a time when there was access to upward mobility and opportunities. And I felt really strongly when the law passed making investment crowdfunding legal. I felt really strongly that this was going to be a tool that was going to game change and really turn us back to that powerful, strong place of a strong middle class. And then I was really disappointed. A, it took 4 years to get the regulations. And B, I was really disappointed in some of the early platforms. A lot of them would sort of advertise that they were going to teach people how to be mini VCs and really going after the same kinds of entrepreneurs that were already getting capital. So I decided to leave my law practice of a couple decades and venture into this space. You know what they say, if you see something that needs to be done, sometimes it's just best to do it yourself. And that's eventually where I landed, was that if I really wanted to see this tool used in the way I think it's capable of being used, then maybe I need to be starting an investment crowdfunding platform.
Awesome. So here's a question for you. What is and what isn't legal when it comes to fundraising? Can I advertise that I'm raising money?
Really good question. Currently, you cannot tell anyone that you are raising money using investment crowdfunding until you file what's called the Form C. The Form C is the regulatory filing that you have to do in order to launch a campaign on an investment crowdfunding site such as Crowdfund Mainstreet. The rules, interestingly, and maybe you've seen this, the SEC has proposed new rules. We don't have them yet. The comment period actually expired June 1st. We're hoping to get the regulations soon. In the new regulations, they're proposing that we have what's called a test the waters period, where you could actually talk about you're going to be launching a campaign so that you can test and see whether or not you could get the traction that you want.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit more about Form C? What do I need?
Yeah, Form C is a document. If you want to sort of, we should step back and say, sort of why the SEC decided to do this. That the SEC was under a lot of pressure from advocates like me to open up investing to anyone. And when they decided to do it, what was determined was that we have to really regulate this space. So Form C is the document that they came up with. It asks you some of the questions you would anticipate. What's the history of the founders? What are the financials of this company? What is the offering? that you're going to have. What are the particular risks investing in your industry? Each business can have sort of general risks and also very specific risks to their industry. So the Form C is really that document that serves as your disclosures when you're raising money. The SEC estimates that it takes about 60 hours to complete the Form C. And as an attorney, I can tell you it can be a little intimidating if you don't have some advice and support in preparing for that.
Awesome. So I'm getting a lot of questions about accredited investors. So I'm just going to go ahead and try and summarize them and combine them. So Michelle, can you talk a little bit more about what it means to be an accredited investor and why individuals can only raise from accredited investors, or what are the exemptions that allow individuals to raise from unaccredited investors, aside from investment crowdfunding?
Well, I'm not going to talk a lot about the exemptions, the other exemptions that allow you to raise money from non-accredited investors, since we're talking about investment crowdfunding. There are a few ways. Usually they limit the number of unaccredited investors you can get. But let's define what an accredited investor is. An accredited investor is someone who makes consistently over $200,000 a year, or has $1 million in net worth over and above the value of their primary residence. So pretty wealthy individuals. And it's good to know where we got this rule. We've actually had the accredited investor rule since after the Great Depression and the great, the market crash at that time. What the SEC determined back in the 1930s was that, people were hurting, and that people who didn't have money really had no business risking money. So they actually took away the ability for individuals to invest in their own communities. We used to have local stock exchanges. People did that very frequently, invested in the businesses that were in their community through those local stock exchanges. This rule, the accredited investor rule, took that away. And the SEC, in its wisdom, said, if you're not already wealthy, you're not smart enough to invest in small business as an asset class, so we're not going to let you. And it took generations of battling that until we finally got the SEC to open it up. And you could do it a little bit before investment crowdfunding. It was just so much harder to do. So now we have this opportunity. This investment crowdfunding is an exemption that allows you to raise money from anyone, including accredited investors. So accredited investors are part of the puzzle, but so is everyone else. And that is really what makes this unique, is that you can really combine those. In my state, California, for example, if you wanted to raise money from everyone, you might be limited in the number of people that you could get that were accredited, and you would have to have a pretty close personal relationship with them. So each of the states have laws that govern how you can do it, and that's where it gets a little complicated. If you wanted to do this another way, you would have a lot of blue sky laws, state securities laws that you would have to comply with.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So here's another question. Is it easier to raise from accredited investors than unaccredited investors? I heard that accredited investors do not like when you use investment crowdfunding.
Yeah, there's a myth out there about that for sure. And where that comes from is that venture style capital, or vulture style capital, however you want to refer to it, but venture style funding is a very specific type of company. And essentially what is the reason they don't like a lot of investors, then you might hear them say, we don't want a lot of people on your cap table. Investment crowdfunding has coming a solution for that, which I'll talk about in a second, but that's why they don't like a big cap table, a lot of people on your cap table, which of course implies that you're raising equity, because they anticipate that the way they're going to get paid is the sale of your company in 3 or 5 years. That the reason that those accredited investors, those venture capitalists and angel investors oftentimes don't want to see a lot of investors on your cap table is because they anticipate that it would be a complication when you go to sell your company, because that's how they make their hockey stick type returns. There are special purpose vehicles. One of the things that the SEC is changing will provide for the ability to use a special purpose vehicle, for example, so that you could have only that one investor on your cap table. So there are workarounds to that if it's truly a problem, but each individual company needs to determine whether or not that's actually an issue for what they're trying to do, and what are some of the workarounds, which there are several.
Awesome. Is there a difference between investment crowdfunding and equity crowdfunding?
No. Equity crowdfunding is a term that a lot of people use. I don't like to use equity crowdfunding as a term because it implies that equity is what you're offering, and that is not always the case. There are lots of really creative ways to use debt as an offering, and so you'll hear the difference between debt and equity is only one piece of the puzzle. But yes, it's very common for investment crowdfunding to be called equity crowdfunding.
Awesome. So how much flexibility do you have in building an offering? Do you have any advice on where to start, or can you give any examples of creative offerings you've seen?
Yes. Lots of room to be creative. In fact, I highly encourage creativity because your offering should reflect your particular business and your trajectory, your growth, and your exit for your investors, whether that means an actual exit or, sort of the Warren Buffett model where they just receive dividends in your company. So the kinds of things that we're seeing in terms of creativity, revenue share has become extremely popular. Revenue share is a type of debt. And the cool thing about revenue share is that in the early stages, when you are not making a lot of money, for example, so let's say you want the money to grow your business, whether it's a new business or one that has existed for 10 years, it doesn't matter. But you want to use your increased revenue as a source to pay back your investors. So you'll decide but the thing is, you don't have to pay that 8% or some certain payment every year. It's tied to your revenue. So let's say you're going to give your investors 7% of your revenue until you have paid them back 1.5 times their original investment. So that when you reached that 1.5 times payback out of your 7% of revenue, you would be done. You wouldn't owe that investor anything, and they wouldn't be on your cap table. They're never going to be on your cap table because it's debt. But that is one of the creative ways. Both investors seem to like revenue share. It's also a way to protect you if you don't want to dilute the ownership of your company. Investors like it because it is a certain obligation, right? If I'm an investor, I know that I'm going to get 1.5 times my money. I don't know exactly how long it's going to take to get me that. And that is the flexibility of that type of offering. But to answer the question even further, the thing that you really want to focus on when you're talking about structuring your offering is you really want to know your numbers. You want to have a handle on what your company basically can afford to pay your investors. Because when an investor evaluates your offering, they're going to be looking at the analysis that went into your projections. They're not looking at your numbers in terms of, are they accurate? Are they going to be right? So much as they're looking at your numbers saying, does this make sense? Is this a reasonable expectation of assumptions that's going to get us to whatever that exit is for the investors? So really having a handle on your numbers puts you ahead of the pack because the more you know your numbers and understand your own path and what those options are, the better job you're going to be able to do creating something exciting or solid and sustainable for your investors.
Awesome. What are a couple components of a successful campaign or mistakes you've seen? Can you give a couple examples of your favorites?
Yeah, for sure. I usually tell people there's three things. There's three things that make up a successful investment crowdfunding campaign. The first one is knowing your network. And even if you don't feel like you have a network of people who are in a position to invest, don't overlook the value of the people that you know who know you and can talk about who you are and what you do. They can still be supporters, even if not everyone can actually invest. And with investment crowdfunding, you can set your minimum as low as $100 per investor. So you can really open it up to a lot of people that you wouldn't normally be able to offer to. So knowing your network, the influencers, it's the same concept as growing your company. We tell people all the time, don't think of fundraising as this, side thing that you have to do to advance your company. It's the core of your business. And just like you would approach growing your business, becoming visible in your sector or your industry or your community, those are all the things that also go into being successful in launching and running an investment crowdfunding campaign. The second I've already talked about, and that is knowing your numbers. You cannot expect me as an investor to feel like you are going to be a good steward of my money if you don't know your numbers and you can't demonstrate to me how it is you're going to use my capital and how it is that you're going to pay me back, hopefully with some upside. So knowing your numbers is number two. Number three is really that piece that we've touched on about crafting your offering and having the legal structure be a fit to your enterprise. The people that I've seen fail usually fail on the network piece, often the numbers piece, but a lot of people fail because they don't take the time to understand the different options and they pick something that's not a fit for their business. They'll pull something off the shelf. They'll say, oh, let's use these crowd safes, but they won't even be able to tell you what those terms mean. And there's not a lot of credibility in that if you can't discuss with a potential investor what your offering means, then I think it really plays into your credibility and that will hurt you in a campaign.
Awesome. And your favorite campaigns?
My very favorite campaign just ended. It was Dope Coffee. And the reason it's my favorite is because the founder is a former military, really gregarious, outgoing man from Atlanta, Georgia, actually, and knew nothing, absolutely nothing about raising capital, period. And when I met Michael and we started talking about the possibilities and started preparing him to be able to raise capital from investors, he just got it. He understood immediately what to do. And he launched in April, like right at the peak of the COVID crisis. And what he did is, he had a marketing plan. One of the things we insist on is a marketing plan. He had a marketing plan. But of course, what happens when the world shuts down is your marketing plan goes out the window. So here was somebody who could have froze, dead in his tracks, could have thrown up his hands, had all the excuses in the world not to succeed. And that's not what he did. He pivoted. He changed his approach and he went after it and he was wildly successful. He reached his maximum. We have people trying to invest after the offering was closed. So that was something that's near and dear to my heart, and I will always remember him and the way he just admirably did what entrepreneurs have to do, which is adjust and pivot when that becomes necessary.
How much money did he raise?
107,000. That was his maximum.
That's awesome. Good for him for reaching his goal.
Yeah.
So someone is saying, I don't have a network of wealth. Do you advertise the offerings on the site?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even though my platform is only about 2 years old, I have been in this space helping small businesses for decades. So myself and my co-founder, we have a pretty deep well of investors, and we pick companies to put on our platform that we know will most likely appeal to our investors. And those investors are interested in really aligning their values with the companies that they invest in. And that can be a pretty broad range. Some of them care a lot about a specific industry. Some of them care a lot about building resilient communities, companies that pay living wages and that will be responsible corporate citizens. We have a lot of impact investors in our community, and that term gets thrown around a lot. But our investors are mostly interested in aligning their values with what they're going to put their savings towards.
Awesome. So I'm going to take the final question. And Michelle, you have raised $10 million from investors personally.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you did that?
Yes. Yeah. It's funny. I started raising money for my dad. I think I mentioned my dad was in real estate, and I've always been really comfortable with real estate as an asset class. And when I was growing up, it wasn't sexy. Real estate investing has become, much more sexy. It wasn't sexy back then. Nobody wanted to be a landlord. That was considered pretty low class, actually. Like, people would make fun of me because my dad had to go plunge toilets, for properties that we owned. So it first started out when I represented small businesses and they needed capital. And these were successful small businesses. But a lot of them were heavily invested in real estate. And one thing about people who invest in real estate is we never have money. We never have cash, because anytime we have cash, we're always putting it into something else. So I had to be really creative. So I coached my clients on how to do that for years before I ever tried it myself. And finally, some of my clients were like, do you ever do this? Like, why don't we do something together? And I actually got the opportunity for a couple real estate investment to go out and pitch and raise money. I loved it. It got me out from behind my desk. It was the kind of engagement that really appealed to me, got to talk about the opportunity. And it was hard, and you do face some rejection, but I learned really quickly that rejection wasn't about me or even necessarily the offering, that it was really just about them and where they were and it not being a fit. And that really served me and helped me. And then once I had success, then everybody wanted me to raise money for them.
Are you ever afraid to make the ask, and how do you get over it? What do you tell yourself?
Yeah, I actually feel like my attitude is I'm presenting you with an opportunity. And I feel like, of course, I believe in what I'm doing. I'm currently raising money. My co-founder and I are launched an opportunity zone fund. So I'm always raising money. And I just feel really strongly about the things that I get involved in, that when I talk to investors, I'm really talking about an opportunity for them to participate in something that I think is really cool and amazing. It might not be a fit for them, but every conversation gets you more comfortable with the concept. And, I tell people all the time, if you're the CEO of your company, your primary objective is to capitalize that company. So you are always going to be in that space where you have to know what you need, and you're going to have to go get money when you need it, whether that's a bank loan or from private investors, and get comfortable with having those conversations.
How do you know when it's the right time, when the person is ready for an ask? And how do you go about building the relationship to the point where you're ready to say invest X?
Yeah, that's a really, really, really good question. Because a lot of times people start with the ask, and that's an almost guaranteed no, right? And if you think about it, so one of the things we tell people is, if you know that that's coming in your future, that you're going to be raising capital at some point, you don't start engaging with your community when you launch your campaign. You actually do it well in advance. And if you haven't been in communication with a lot of people, then you pick up the phone or you send a message and you ask about how they're doing. You don't start out with the ask. You pick the people that you do know, whether they're advisors or an aunt, it doesn't matter, but somebody who you think is somebody you respect. So oftentimes what we tell people is, have a practice conversation. Go to somebody that you admire and say, I'm coming to you because I really admire you and I respect your opinion, and I'd like to share with you what I'm thinking about doing because I'm getting ready to raise money. And you can do that one-on-one with a private person that you know, and let them hear you out and give you feedback, and also answer questions about why they would or wouldn't invest,
Yeah.
which can be really helpful.
Yeah. What if we improvise a little bit
Yeah,
and we practice? Okay.
sure.
And you can give me feedback. So hypothetical scenario, let's say I am raising money for a coffee shop. And this is a super cool coffee shop because everything is made from recycled materials. And every time you buy a cup of coffee, we release a sea turtle into the ocean. So, double bottom line, we have great coffee, eco friendly, humane trade, we pay our workers, and we want this coffee shop to be owned by our baristas. So the offer I have is debt, and I want to do revenue share because again I want the workers to own the company. And how would I start? So where would you even start?
Yeah, no, you really did. You just started. You just
Great.
described your business to me. Now I want to know. I say, that's great. That's great, Juliana, that you have this idea. Tell me a little bit about what brought you to this decision to do this. What's your background? What drew you to coffee? Do you have
Yeah.
some experience in this?
Awesome. So my acting improv is gonna come out. My board
Yeah.
member Nura might be proud. Okay. Okay. So Um, yeah, so I worked at Starbucks my whole life, and I honestly just got tired of making money for someone else. A lot of the times, the customers come in to see me because I give the best advice and I make the best coffee, and I take a lot of pride in it. So I thought, you know what, it's time for me to launch my business. And also, my specialty is making caricatures in coffee. It's like an art form. It's very Buddhist because the foam, you know,
Mhm.
is temporary, right? So there's a spiritual component to it.
Right.
So that was the first thing. Then the second thing is, I mean, Twitters are just getting destroyed, and I wanted a business that pays it forward. And I know my fellow baristas want to have a piece of the business we work in, right? And they're going to work that much harder, right? So that's why I want it to be employee owned.
So my question is, I mean, that's really great. And I love to hear the connection. The
Yeah.
why is always really important. I want to make sure that you've done some investigating and some work along the lines of you think this is a really great idea,
Mm,
right? And you have a vision for this company. I want to know what makes you think that the world is ready for you and that there's actually a market for what you want to do.
very good. Very good. Thank you for calling me out on that. I wish I could say I did it intentionally, but no. Okay, so um, the truth, Michelle, is that I have done some research into the market, and where I'm located in Washington, D.C., there is a coffee shop on every corner. However, in Baltimore, there is this very cute neighborhood that I've been looking at that I have connections in. And actually, one of my co founders lives there. And there aren't any coffee shops in that area, in that neighborhood. So we think that is the perfect location for it. We went out and we gave some samples of our coffee, and we already actually have a customer base of potential clients who are willing to try our coffee. So we've accumulated 5,000 emails of people who would come to our grand opening. And we feel we are ready. We feel this is not just does good for the world, but this could potentially be a very lucrative business. And
Let's talk about that. Let's
yeah,
talk about, because lucrative is a really great, lucrative is great, especially if you're looking to raise investment capital. Lucrative is a very good thing. Tell me a little bit about your revenue model. Are you roasting? Is somebody else doing the roasting?
yeah,
How are you going to make money as a coffee shop?
right, right. So we are actually not roasting our own coffee. We're importing it. The value that we bring is actually in the space itself, right? So yes, the coffee is great. Yes, we make our own coffee, and yes, there's that, right? Very artsy aspect to it, right? Which is an added value, right? You get to look at something beautiful, just like when you buy a piece of art. But in our space, we're going to have meetups and music festivals and poetry, spoken word competitions, right? So it's really about the space, and we know people are going to come in for that, right? So we have a healthy margin on the coffee. Also, coffee doesn't expire very frequently, right? So um, we have very risk for loss of raw materials. The greatest cost is really our rent, right? So if we can keep the space filled, we can um, we can make a healthy revenue. Also, in the long term, we plan on owning all of our locations. So we'll be testing out for the first year to see how that location goes, and then if it works out, we'll actually be looking at buying, so
Mhm.
that this is not only a a business in a service business, but also a real estate um,
Mhm.
behind it, just in case we need to liquidate the
Yeah.
asset. We can build a little bit of, you know,
Yeah, no, and in fact, that's one of the things that we're really working on. One of the things I'm working on, and you got to, you give space for an investor, a potential investor, to talk about themselves and ask them questions about themselves. And so, my experience and my current situation, where I'm looking at my investment, my opportunity zone fund, one of the things that we're doing is trying to combine the investment stacking. So, the potential for investment crowdfunding, where you get your initial investors and then potentially follow on investing that can have that real estate component. So that's actually really exciting to me, because I'm somebody who believes really strongly in small businesses owning their own space. So I love that that's part of your vision. I guess what my real question is, walk me through what you anticipate being able to. You say you're going to do revenue share, which again really appeals to me, because I like the fact that I'm not coming in and owning a piece of your company. Your baristas, your employees are going to own your company. So maybe you'll be a co-op, your legal structure, we can talk about that. But let's talk about what your expectation is for how long it's going to take you to pay back, what percentage of revenue. Have you thought about those things?
Yes, we're beginning to think about it. So here's the thing. I don't want a lot of investors. So I'm looking to raise a minimum of $5,000 per investor. And I can pay you back 2x over the course of 5 years. But I will be unable to pay back anything within the first year. Um, that first year, we really need to put all the money back into the business and marketing and promotions. Once we have a community, I know we'll be able to pay back. Um,
And that's great. Do you have some projections, executive summary? I'd love to see the bio of your team. I'd love to see your corporate structure, and I'd really love to see your projections.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, we're a co-op. I'll send that right over.
Awesome.
Okay, so how did I do?
You did really well. You did the thing that I tell people all the time, and I'm a social entrepreneur. So your mission is actually extremely important to me. But I don't want you to mistake the mission of your company for that value that you're asking from me as an investor, right? So I would have liked a discussion about, you talked a lot about how you're benefiting the baristas, what a great coffee shop it's going to be for the community, which is all really important things. But I want more information about what's in it for me as an investor. So not so, the return is good. The return sounded reasonable to me, but I'm also looking at, selling me on why why would I do that? The mission of your company is the cherry on top. The fact that you are a socially minded entrepreneur is going to make my final decision really easy if that's where my values align with you. But even before we get there, I want to know economically why this is good for me, which is where we kind of go back to the knowing of the numbers. And then the other thing is just, really understanding who you're talking to. Where's my money currently invested? Have I ever invested in a small business before? Have I ever known anybody that's invested? Do I have a 401k? Do I know where my money's invested? That kind of thing, so that you can sort of get a handle on who you're talking to. It's not just about you, it's about who you're talking to and being genuinely curious about that person's experience.
Right. I feel like there's a lot of preconceived notions about impact investors investing in businesses that are less lucrative. And I'm really curious as to what is the kind of return that a so-called impact investor would seek versus a non-impact investor, or would it be the same?
Often it is the same. I mean, just because you're an impact investor doesn't mean you don't want a solid return. Oftentimes an impact investor will take other things into consideration. So for example, my view of a return might not be just the financial piece. My view of the return might be the number of jobs that you're creating. Maybe I'm in love with this community, Baltimore, and I know Baltimore and I love Baltimore, and I think Baltimore should be more than Baltimore is, and I would love to see that community thrive. So for me, that counts as something in addition to the financial return. Professional investors, I'll just say this, it's hard to generalize, but let's generalize. Professional investors are trained, right? They're typically trained to seek those hockey stick returns. And the reason that they're trained that way is because it's a failure model. So in other words, they go into investing thinking most of you are going to fail, right? This is a failure model. So we need that unicorn because we have to make up for all these losses. Venture capital loses money on average. Any venture capitalist will tell you that. The thing that impact investors are is we're not looking at this from a failure perspective. We're looking at this from a sustainability perspective. So to the extent that that can influence the kinds of returns that you have an expectation for, that's where you'll see the difference rather in the dollars and cents. But in general, yes, because impact investors are looking at more than just the financial return, then they're going to, in some cases, consider investments that they might not otherwise do because of the social impact. And to answer your question, you asked me what's a good return. And I want to address that because a lot of people ask that question. And what is a good return is what can you and your company reasonably afford to pay? Because that tells me a lot. How right are you about your sort of your revenue model, your business model? Is there enough money to actually pay investors? It says a lot about your business model. And so that's why I really want you to know. And if you tell me as an investor with credibility that this is what you can afford to pay me as an investor, that's a powerful position to be in, because an investor is going to respect the fact that you understand exactly what you can afford to pay me. It means that you've considered this and you probably are going to be successful if you got a handle on your numbers like that. So that's a thing that you have to consider as well. You're not asking the investor to tell you what they're putting in. You're actually telling the investor what you can afford to pay them.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We are at time. Any final words of wisdom before we go?
I just think that this is a tool that everyone should be supporting and using, because we need to build generational wealth in our communities that are marginalized. We need to have access to capital. So I believe in this model. It's a tool that is unlike any other that we have, and I think we should be using it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I think it's funny how you generalized around investors, and you said it's a failure model, right? And when I was talking about sea turtles, it's also a failure model. Most sea turtles die, right? And that's why I love him so much, because I'm betting on the little guy to succeed. And quite frankly, I think small business is not the little guy. It's the 99.7% of all business, but it receives such little investment. And I've started to refer to a small business as not marginalized but underinvested, right? Because there's so much potential, so much talent that's just unmined. And I'm so excited to be working with small business. I'm so excited that you're working with small business. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Bye. See you guys next time. See you tomorrow, actually. We have another one going on tomorrow, same time, 4 p.m. ET to 5 p.m. ET.
Good. Thank you for your work, Juliana.
Thank you, Michelle. You've been one of our biggest supporters from the beginning.
We love you guys.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
And I have to talk to you about Street Pitch 2020.